So what I thought today, first of all, welcome Russ. Russ is a tremendous addition to this process. At our last meeting, one of the things we talked about was really wanting, some guidance, some resources, some external perspective. We know that you've been through this before. And so I think that brings tremendous value to what we're doing. I thought we would take a minute, do a quick background recap that might be helpful for you and for Jim. And also, we have modified our charter slightly. So I don't know if we need to officially approve it or if we're going to bring it to the school committee.
Yeah, so the way we did the motion, Russ, what happened at the last meeting was we brought forward the charter. Lori brought forward the charter on behalf of the subcommittee, and one member, former member now actually, but one member had some concerns with the language and the spirit of the way the wording was in the charter. So four, because there were only five present. So 4 people voted to approve the letter, and one declined. And so what Lori did afterwards was she just reached out to that individual to say, what is it on the letter that you weren't comfortable with? And so they talked about it, and then she revised it a little. It wasn't a lot. It was just the way in which some of the sentences were structured, but the spirit of it, the language of it, the meaning of it behind it is very much the same. And so that's been tweaked. So what we're going to do is bring it back to the full committee, right, to do an official vote on the revised letter. But in the meantime, what we're doing is we've sent out the letter to the selectmen requesting to be on their agenda for upcoming meetings. Just because in the charter itself, if we waited until that meeting, then we pushed all our timelines and everything that we had done. So verbally, each one individually had said, we're fine with the change, we're fine with the change. So unofficially, they're fine with the change, so I said it was okay to proceed. Is that okay? I mean, I know technically you're supposed to do the official vote and so forth, but we already know, Cheryl already has their...
Yeah, you don't really need a charter. And I mean, you don't really have to have one in the first place, so it's fine if...
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the 2 things about that. One was that when we took our initial vote of what the purpose was, it was stated in a certain way that the member who objected to the wording of the charter, he really was correct, that the wording was just, the charter kind of came out a little stronger languaged than he expected. And I said, yeah, you're right.
There was a concern on the spirit of it too, that we were proceeding with a foregone conclusion that this was going to be something we are pushing for no matter what, and we still leave the open opportunity that if things don't get received properly, that we don't get the support, it doesn't seem to make sense for all parties. This isn't a foregone conclusion. We reserve the right at that point to say, nope, charter was formed, we didn't come to a consensus, we don't want to move forward. That's okay. I think that the concern of that member was that this was we're in the chamber, we're in the barrel of the gun, we're firing no matter what.
Yeah.
So.
Right. And I think my feeling in reaching out to him was I did not want us to start this process on that kind of a note. That, I mean, truthfully, we had enough votes, we clearly were proceeding, but it really was making sure that this process has integrity and that we are following through on sort of the tone and spirit of what's intended. So
thank you for reaching out to that member. I thought that was really good to get that feedback.
We had a great conversation, and he was very open, by the way, to the discussion. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to chat about a little bit is to kind of lay out some of the timelines. And then once we do that, that's really just informational, making sure people have things on their calendars. But then I would like to really get into a conversation about our concerns, our needs, our gaps in the process. like I'm feeling some gaps, and I think Russ could maybe provide some help and guidance in some of those areas. So timelines, I think the first thing we have coming up is May 22nd. And that's a Boylston Selectmen's meeting, correct?
Yes, 6:30.
Okay.
Are we all going to that, if possible?
So I think that's what we were trying to do, right, was to try to get the three of you to be able to go to that one, and then the three of you to also go to Berlin's, so that you're a unified committee.
Now, the 30th is tentatively Berlin's, but it sounded like from the communication we received back, they were gonna discuss whether we could present, or?
Yeah, I know, I'm not sure, and that's also the same night as the baccalaureate mass at the high school too. So if we are having it, I have to kind of run in and then run right out, because I have to go to the baccalaureate mass, the seniors. But
What time
yeah.
is baccalaureate?
Baccalaureate's at 7, and it's here at Boylston at St. Mary's in the Hills. So as long as I'm out of there by 6:45, I can scoot
What time
to
is
St. Mary's.
the Berlin?
6:30. Right? Isn't it 6:30? They start at 7? 6:30 question mark here. I'm not sure, I'll double check.
I think they start at 7, and I think when you go on their agenda, their secretary gives you a time. So we
Yeah,
could
so
ask
if
to
it
be
starts at
late
7,
in
it'd
their,
start to be later.
we could ask to be late on their agenda.
Yeah, that would be good, because then I can be done with the baccalaureate mass and scoot down. At like 8. Okay.
All right, and then Monday, June 5th, is that the date of the first teachers'
Yep.
meeting?
The staff meeting, and so we have, Lori, you were gonna go to Boylston Elementary, I believe, right? With,
That was me.
with Bob. I were doing the high school, and Angela, you and Karen were gonna do Berlin Memorial. What we did on this committee, Russ, in regards to administration involvement, we had Karen, and myself obviously involved, we had Karen involved as the PPS director, because if there's ever any questions as they move forward, and what about special ed, how does that meet the services, Karen could speak on that. And we included Bob as well, because as the financial director, there's questions about finances, obviously. It made sense to have Bob involved with any kind of financial research that we would do in this process.
That makes sense.
Remind me of the time of the teachers.
Sure. So at Tohoto, it's at 2, we get there about 2:20, just as the buses are leaving. And at the elementary school, their staff meetings begin at 3:15, but if you get there around 3:05, that way there you can be all set up with anything that you need to be. One thing the staff do not like is if they're already in there and then they're waiting for you to show up.
Okay.
They do not like that.
Where are staff meetings held at BMS?
So right in the library.
Okay.
And also the same is true at Boylston Elementary at the library. We're also, Diane moved hers, Matt, to the auditorium because the teachers' behavior's in the library. So she actually moved them to the auditorium.
Because what?
The teachers' behavior's in the library.
They were too quiet? I never.
They were grouped together, you
Oh,
know,
okay.
and they'd have their own
Pods.
discussion while you're
Oh,
trying to run a
okay.
staff meeting. So she
okay.
said, we're gonna move them to the auditorium where you're all sitting facing straight ahead. So we'll be in the auditorium.
Okay. And then the first meeting of the actual group, of which we're recruiting members, is June 8th
Right.
at 7, I think.
7:30, Regionalization Committee meeting.
All right, 7:30.
Did we say that was at Tohoto in the multipurpose room, like our typical meetings, right?
I think
I think
so.
that's what we had planned.
It was June 8th.
Can I back up and ask a technicality question. We're recruiting some teachers to join the committee, and I know when they're on a committee, they usually get a stipend. Will that be the
No,
same?
that's all different.
Okay.
That's different. Some committees are stipends when, for various reasons, but this
Okay.
is something that we're asking them to volunteer
It's volunteer.
for the sake of their union.
Okay.
So they might ask for that, and at that point, I'd bring it back to the committee for suggestions, but different committees, we have people
And just present
on
it
some
back.
committees that aren't getting stipends, and some on committees that are getting stipends. They're all,
Okay.
depends on the purpose.
Okay. Thank you.
The other thing I just want to quickly review, and honestly, I'm a little concerned that June 8th will be so early in a lot of these processes that we won't really have a full complement
I
of.
don't think we'll have all the members that are considering joining. I don't know if we should necessarily delay it, though. I think we should
No, I
begin and
think it's-
proceed and.
I think it's a
with-
first step,
yeah,
right?
which we know.
And if we need to make another meeting in 2 weeks from that, then with that, because we haven't made anything after that, we wanted to see who was in the
Yeah.
committee, right? And then we would set up the dates.
The
And
other
we already
thing,
have-
I need to cut you
Go
off,
ahead.
sorry.
I was just saying, we already have one volunteer from Boylston FinCom.
Yes.
right, Seth, right.
The reason I brought that question, Nadine, about,
Yeah.
on the website, he's not listed as a
Yeah, I know.
member, so I was just like, I appreciate that they were offering him, but I'm like, make sure he's on the committee. Because
Right.
we were gonna get general citizen possible input, right?
Right.
That's a good point around another change that was made on the, and I don't know if people really noticed it. I actually was talking with Ken Cleveland after the last meeting, and one of the things he said to me is, have you thought at all about having somebody from the community who's not a parent necessarily, just a resident of the community? And I thought, I think that's a pretty good point. that-
You should. Usually there is.
Yeah,
It'd
okay,
be unusual not to have
right.
somebody that's not.
So what we did say is we've added to a resident from each community.
Yeah.
But I think we can also review the composition of the group when we start meeting, and is there an area still missing? Is there somebody else that we want to invite to be a part of it? One of the other things we had discussed was sending home something to parents who might be interested. We just had that as May. We didn't have a specific date.
Okay.
What's the timing on something like that? Like
If you want to give me a draft letter or something, I can put it out as my school messenger. I mean, it literally is a click and a click and a click, and it's out there.
okay. And I guess we would send the charter with that as well?
Right, we'd send the charter and the invite.
Not to get into specifics on that sending, do we get good open rates on those email communications
Oh,
to
yeah.
people? Okay, so,
And it comes from my,
okay.
because I don't send
Just
them that
sometimes-
often. If I sent them constantly, then no, that would go down. But I don't send things constantly, so people know that if I'm sending something, it's gotta be pretty urgent or
Okay.
pretty important. Yeah, principals, they might have it's an influx, right? Because they send them out weekly for the elementary principals anyway.
Okay.
It sends out stuff weekly. I don't. I'm pretty much snow days, emergencies, or the crisis piece that I
Yeah.
just sent out this last week. And
Good.
I get a lot of response actually
Good,
back.
okay.
All right, just to quickly review the composition that we've laid out in the charter is 3 people from the school committee as appointed, which we have. We have 3 members and legal counsel from administration. We are looking for 2 members of select boards, 1 from each community, 2 members of finance committees, 1 from each community, 3 members, teachers, 1 from each school, 4 parents, 2 from each community, and 2 residents, 1 from each community. So that's the composition. It's going to be a cast of thousands.
We don't have an expectation to have anybody that's a choice person because they have no
They have no say in the
say in the
regional.
regional.
Right.
3 school committee members, 1 from high school, 1 from the 2 elementaries, or?
Well, the school, we all represent both.
Oh, you all have both positions? Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
We do happen to have a composition right now where two of us are Boylston and one is Berlin.
Okay.
But that was not intentional. It really was who wants
Who was
to do
interested at that
this.
time?
It's probably fair to state if at any point there needs to be a change in that, it can be. You know what I mean, if we need to.
Well, that's
Jim's here today too, and probably more for the learning,
Right.
but input through us.
Yep.
I don't think
Sometimes
it's to be
there's-
fearful to be at every meeting yet.
So you avoid one of the pitfalls, which is sometimes the committees, usually it's high school, school committee, two separate elementary committees, different people. And so when you regionalize, everybody knows somebody's losing their position. So you eliminate that issue at least.
Right.
I think that's our hope, that the ultimate outcome is that the school committee stays intact,
As a
really.
6-person panel.
Right. I mean, Angela's done some research on different models of how that, whether you have them, we're all elected from both communities.
Yeah, there's usually five options. It's under, what is it? 16E, I think it is. Anyway, it's in the statute. That is one option, but that's good because that's actually one of the sticking points typically, is how many, from which town, who's it gonna be? So you eliminate that issue at least.
That would be a control concern, right? So, which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering though, if you move, this is probably jumping ahead in terms of our agenda, but if you were moving to all the school committee members have to be elected by both communities, I would think you still keep some protection in there to be sure that you still end up with 3 and 3.
Oh yeah, you're elected district-wide, but the way you get, so the guiding principle is one man, one vote. So every vote of a citizen has to be equal, essentially. So the way you could make this work, even though Berlin's smaller than Boylston, you can have 3 and 3 as long as you do district-wide elections. So you set it at 3 and 3. It's just that Boylston will be voting on Berlin's members and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But that complies with the law. You can do it that way.
Okay.
Or you continue to operate where we're doing 3 and 3 from each community voted by the local community as representation.
And then you weight the votes. You could weight the votes, but that's where you get into more discussion, because let's say Berlin is 20% of the population. So they might have 3 members, but the 3 members' votes in total only represent 20% of every vote. So that's the district-wide eliminates some of that type of issue. So a lot of places go district-wide elections.
Just curious.
Because the other routes are
It's more common to
all,
see a district-wide election.
Yeah, you would basically have a smaller say in Berlin if you did it that way.
and then the other
Towns would.
basic routes, so there's 3 that most places use, those are 2 of them. The third one would be, you could have, 4 Boylston members and 1 Berlin member or something, based on population. And if you do the population route, every 10 years, you have to look at the census and see if it changed, and then it changes the percentages and the weighting. But then every vote you take, you have to calculate how the vote went, percentage-wise, so it's kind of a pain to do it that way, but.
And I think our philosophy has been that if you go to a weighted vote, there is a perception from the part of Berlin that they're losing something. They're losing the voice.
District-wide.
Yeah.
Whereas district-wide
Everyone has a
keeps
say.
everybody on a level playing field. So,
Yeah, and it's pretty rare, in my experience, to see voting on town lines at the committee level. That really doesn't normally happen. In the place I did have it happen, they actually split up. So it's not a typical phenomenon to have that happen.
I don't think
People get
we've-
more worried about in regionalization discussions, and I always say in those meetings, it's like you're talking about 0.5% of the time that happens. The rest of the time, it doesn't happen. So, sometimes you worry about the thing that really isn't an issue. But in your case, the easiest thing is just leave it the way it is.
And everybody's been content just leaving it the way it is, actually. I mean, it's working, so why, if it's not broke, don't fix it on that on that composite anyway.
So leaving it the way it is would not be district-wide voting. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you could leave it 3 and 3, but do district-wide elections.
Right.
But how are you doing 3 and 3 now?
We're doing appointment. Our region is appointed by
Oh,
the
okay.
Berlin School Committee and the Boylston School Committee respectively.
Okay.
So people are actually elected for
Their town,
Elementary.
elementary, and get appointed.
and then get appointed.
That's interesting.
We think
Okay.
so.
We are interested, Ross. You have
'Cause
to
that's,
admit.
I gave you the 3 normal ones. That's not the normal.
Can you define what you mean by
But it's one of the, it's
It
one
was
of
one of
the,
the 5 options.
it's one of the 5 options. So it's not one that anybody usually picks.
or anybody? Except us.
No.
317 districts, there's one. It's us.
So it'd be a change, but you
Special.
still have 3 and 3. The other unusual thing about that, though, is having even numbers. Most boards have an odd number for obvious reasons, because you don't want to have a tie vote. But
But I think an
if it's been working, I
example,
wouldn't change that either.
I think one example where it does cause a lot of hostility at school committee meetings is my previous district, right? Because you had 3 in one town and 6 from another town. You had a 9-member board. When you have those 6 and those 3, and you have 2 out of those 3 that aren't there, you still have a quorum, but you only have 1 representative for that town. It causes a lot of, you know,
I think keeping 3 and 3 going forward for our
it works.
current, well, it works, and we are also sensitive to the balance. We don't want to, that would be a major negative, I think, from the town of Berlin if suddenly that weight just got slipped away. That's, you know, we've determined that was one of the biggest concerns is control. And we don't, the first thing we're offering is the removal of control. It's not going to be well received.
So I've been attending school meetings for less than a year, but I haven't seen many votes where maybe there's one vote that's different
Yep.
than the majority.
Yep.
And in towns where you see something going through and there's 4 versus 3, I mean, it's typically more contentious, and
Yep.
it's not contentious now for the most part, so.
I think we can do it.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about concerns, or maybe a better way to phrase it is preparation, things that would be helpful to have us be well prepared as we head into meetings with select boards and teachers and the community. By way of background, there have been 2 feasibility studies done. I think honestly, we're not 100% confident that either is a complete representation of the impact of regionalization. Is that a fair way to say that? One was more of a global view and was not really a deep dive, and we recognized that it was a start, but there was a need for really a more thorough look at the financial ramifications. At the end of the day, the financial report that we received in that second one, I think we still had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns about the information that was being presented, some of the projections, and there was a sort of a big concern around if you just looked at what's the bottom line here, it was concerning in terms of inequity between the towns. The impact of regionalization was far more financially beneficial to Berlin and really detrimental in a sense to Boylston. As a net, in total, it was really a modest impact on the overall financial picture. But obviously, communities, as we're engaging in this process, are going to be very sensitive to how's this impact on our community. So one of the questions I had was whether, Bob, have you had a chance to read through the Abrams materials?
I have not.
And is that an option that we could ask you to sort of read, understand, and maybe there's even the opportunity for some updated thinking, some projections from your point of view?
Yeah, I can certainly take a look at it. I don't know how complex it is, and so I can certainly start diving into it. The way I would...
Her face just said, not
Dude,
that
it's not going to be complex, given the fact that you and I understand the terms of assessments and so forth. I think,
No, the first one was done by Central Mass Regional Planning.
and what happened with Central Mass
Commission.
Regional Planning Commission is, the reason why is because we were trying to go for the 211 grant, and they changed the language of that grant. That grant used to be for exploratory, right, purposes, and that's where a lot of districts, I believe Mahar and a lot of them, I believe that's where they got the funding, was through that grant to do exploratory. Then when we decided to apply for it, they had just changed it that year, that it's no longer for exploratory, but now for action. So there was no money in the grants that we could apply for to pay to have this feasibility study done. And so a couple of one member anyway from Berlin heard about this and happened to have been on the board for Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. And he reached out to us and said, you could do it through a grant through them, and I believe they could do it. So it's an interesting grant is that we applied for the grant through them, but then they actually received the money for the grant to do the actual feasibility study. So when they did it, they had never done a regional school district. They had done other companies, but not schools, on what it would be. So I did give them suggestions to reach out to Dr. Hemmen to get some information, and they did a little bit. Halfway through their research, they kind of switched hands of who was doing the actual study. So some of the things were not as thorough on regionalization, on the financial implications. So when they gave their presentation, there were some gaps we felt in some of the presentation. Not that they didn't do a good job with what they did do, but there were things that they didn't think about on a regional district that we have to think about, and because they wouldn't have known to look at that. So that's when we then hired Mark and Matt Abrams to do the feasibility, and we did pay for that out of our general fund budget to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually most of the regionalization efforts I've been involved in also involve MARS, Mass Association of Regional School Committees, and it was Steve Hemmen that I typically worked with.
Right. The reason
And
why-
he gave a pretty good report. He
Yeah.
did one recently, Mount Greylock, that I thought was pretty comprehensive.
And I just saw him yesterday, actually, at a meeting with Bob and I, and he was asking us about, where are you at, what's going on, when are you gonna call? The school committee was kind of moving away from Mars initially because we didn't want, some members felt that there may have been a bias towards forcing towards regionalization. So they wanted an independent company to come and actually do the feasibility study without an opinion one way or the other. So we know that Mark, he works for the state, all over the state, doing one way or the other. He doesn't hold anything towards it, but we just felt that the perception, if we had Mars, it might have been not perceived positively in the community. If we had simply Mars give it. You might be at a point now where Mars could come in and do something, and I'd be happy to
Are you going to do
contact
another
Steve.
study, or are you just going to leave the two you have?
Well, the big issue we're going to have is, well, there's two things. One is, I personally would really welcome Mars' involvement at this stage because of the fact that they've done the process so many times. They really can help be a guidepost along the way. But the other piece is, I think we need further analysis on the financial implications, because if we just rely on what we have right now, it leaves a big question mark in people's minds. And there may be first of all, the analysis that Abrams did may well be the best we can get. But where they left off, that we really wanted them to go further, is around what are the options that communities have in a circumstance where the impacts are lopsided.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
And this might be just like for my own educational purpose.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Is the committee concerned about tying the financial conversation back to the previous topic we were talking about in terms of the control factor, right? I just wonder if you see questions, concerns, right? As you see one community investing further, typically people, when they invest more, want more control, right? So on one side, we're talking about giving equal control as it relates to a board committee standpoint, yet one side investing more money. Are we staying away from that topic from the sense of hoping to progress, or are we?
I don't think we're avoiding it. I think it's the way it stands today. Berlin invests more in their elementary education per pupil than Boylston. The contracts are sort of there's a lot of factors that have sort of unbalanced the scales to begin with, right? I don't think we're avoiding the fact that the Abrams study came back and told us there was a small benefit towards busing. I think that was the benefit that we saw coming financially out of this. But at the end of the day, when you join together as a full region, it's per pupil. So at the end of the day, the pupil, it's what, 53 or what is it now in Boylston? I even forget the numbers.
You could say 13,000, just going to get round numbers, it's not exact, 13,000 Boylston Elementary, 18,000 in Berlin.
Yeah. But we carry what percentage of the population today?
Oh, 63?
Yeah, 60. So we're basically going to be moving from a position where we're carrying, let's just say, equal, 50% of the budget, even at the elementary level. We're almost spending the same, fewer pupils. We're now going to have to pick up that slack, and Boylston and Berlin is going to get the benefit. So it's going to come out. It's going to get washed out at some point. The question is, how do we slowly taper towards that instead of just a slam?
And I think that we have been working on that actually here internally. I mean, this year you only have a 1% increase, and it's not even a 1% budget increase, but we did it that way to use less school choice money, so we have more reserve in our school choice funds in Berlin. So our actual, we were less than 1% of an increase, so we're finding ways of, we don't need to utilize some of this funding. But what you do have, like in Boylston, for example, what people are gonna think is that, well, with the region, they're paying more. But right now, like I was just meeting with Karen yesterday, as a matter of fact, we just got, for example, 5 new students that came in, all with severe disabilities, and they all live in Boylston. And that's huge, and that's at the elementary level. That's preschool and kindergarten level. And so that's gonna up Boylston's money anyway, whether it's region or not. But
Yeah.
people will start having those false perceptions of where that's coming. Where Berlin's special ed population is decreased, Boylston, the move-ins here are really strong with special needs. And we don't have those resources, so we're going to have to start pouring more of those resources into our elementary school.
That's why I think it's important, right? As a newcomer coming in, right? Lack of education, even just in my aspect of, right? I think that's a big benefit of the committee, right? And the goal is to be able to give that education back, right? Because if I'm thinking about members like myself, just in each community, they're going to want to know those answers, right? Which is why I kind of asked the question. I was just asking from a purpose of.
It's not a one-to-one vote necessarily, meaning we're only paying for the kids in our community, each community, right, at the end of the day. But when we sit at a 6-person panel, that's where the sort of inequity in the balance, right? Because if we carry 63% of the students and
Really
a
make
vote,
50%
of the vote. So it is a.
I just think it's those are things that people think about, right? And if you think about forecasting for the process of getting this to the end result, depending on which way the committee goes, right? These are the things that you have to think about. And get to that.
I think your point is a very good point, and it's a valid one, that people do equate money with control.
Correct,
Yeah.
right.
So that's a very valid point. I think maybe even the bigger issue or concern is that right out of the gate, the first question that some people are going to have is, what's the financial impact of my town? And that's where it becomes a non-starter if we're starting right out of the gate saying, well, the impact here is higher, here is lower. If I'm a Boylston select board member or finance committee member, I'm going to be thinking, well, why are we talking about this? If it's going to increase.
When people hear that, they want to know what more they're getting, right?
Yeah.
That's what people hear.
And I'll
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
you
It doesn't
the
mean it's the
truth.
best decision or the right decision. It just
Right.
means that's what people.
I'm not 100% convinced that what we saw in that final assessment or analysis is in fact what the ultimate outcome will be. That's the part that's a little bit difficult about it is I don't think we're ready to go out and
And I
say,
think if you can't say that, if you can't come out and say that you feel that that's accurate, then I think you need to look at doing the.
yeah, we have to do
doing another
something
one or
else,
whatever the
something
next
in
step.
addition.
There was a lot of projections in that too, based on population census and direction. And since that study was done, there's been a potential major influx of population in Boylston, right? There's the potential for, like, then we have more revenues in Boylston too. So there's been a lot of changes in the community that, you know, one negative, one positive at the end of the day. So I think at some point, we know that the numbers are only probably good for a year or two from a projection standpoint. And we ran this out for 20 years or something like that, or
Right.
10 years. Those numbers are
And I think what was
very
really,
far-fetched.
Russ, I don't know if you saw the one that Mark did, but what he did in his analysis was he showed over a 20-year span, and what it showed was that Boylston was paying more. But then he also showed that if they don't regionalize, they're also paying more. What he didn't close is by saying that if you don't regionalize, you're paying more than if you do regionalize. And that didn't come through the first time. We had him actually come out and explain it, and it was a little bit clearer, but it was still, the way he presented it was so vague. But then what they did was they took like our population in 12th in kindergarten, and they just used that as they went through.
That's what I
So
was
it's
gonna say.
really not
Yeah, I mean,
projection.
and younger at Berlin.
Which is hard.
typically, all you really end up, typically what most places do, is you look at health insurance, everybody's got to have the same percentage. So Berlin, that's a big problem because you don't have retiree insurance, so you regionalize, and all those teachers would have, and support staff at the elementaries, they're going to have retiree insurance at the high school. Well, the way the high school does it. So once you regionalize, that's an issue.
And that's an issue for the town, by the way, because Berlin is very worried about that because that has implications for other town employees as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not so sure that really makes, because Tohoto has retiree insurance, and so does Boylston Elementary. So if they're worried about other places having it, almost everybody in the state has it.
Yeah, but they
Yeah.
take pride in the fact that they don't.
Yeah, but
It would be
but they'd be your employees now, so it should be really irrelevant for the town.
It'd be a regional employee, not a town employee.
But I think, you have insurance, you have salary schedules would have to be merged. And by the way, that doesn't mean they have to be merged in the first year.
Right.
Yeah,
They have to be one
table.
contract, but you can move them. But it's very difficult to keep two different schedules forever. So at some point, you have to assume they're going to be the same.
Do you base it on new hires, meaning the existing employees, existing Berlin teachers stay on their exact path forever?
Usually the first step is typically you just say, in year one, what is this going to look like? How much is this going to cost? And then after that, deciding how you project out is really, I'm not sure how they're doing that. They probably all do it differently. I don't think taking kindergarten makes any sense though, because kindergarten, especially at the elementary level, sometimes you have kids going to especially in my town, like they're going to private schools, they might be going to Catholic school, and then they come in like third, fourth grade, you start seeing changes. So I don't think kindergarten is necessarily the best place to look if that's what they did, but
from the projection.
for the
Yeah,
projection.
For the projection,
numbers,
because, and it's true, that's why, if you notice, this year, I didn't do any school choice for K or 1, because that's what we're seeing. K, right now we have 26 kids. If we let school choice come in now, then in first grade,
Boom.
it's going to hit, because in first grade, over the summer of going into first grade, we'll get on average about 8 to 10 kids. They come in that didn't take our kindergarten program, but are our first grade program.
Yeah.
I want to take a step back because we're starting to get into real specifics. And what I'd like to focus on, though, is process. And, you've brought up the fact that Mars is often involved. Has Mars been providing some of the financial analysis as well as part of that involvement?
Yes.
So can we explore what the costs would be if we were to involve Mars?
Yeah, I believe it's somewhere around 25,000 when we looked into it before.
I don't know.
I think it's around there.
But you could probably, if you want them to just do the financial analysis, do you want them to come out and present? I mean, maybe they just do the analysis for you and don't present because of the concerns about, whether they're pushing a certain route or not. But I would imagine you could probably get a menu from them of what they do for what amount of money.
And do we need to have them? Yeah, I like the menu option too, because I think like there's a couple of data points. One is what happens to the overall budget? Forget the split between towns. What happens to the overall budget? Certain key drivers, like what's going to happen to the teacher compensation scales. Like I don't dive into the details, but for example, if Berlin gets health insurance, they're very highly compensated, the elementary school district, so there might be some offset there. But what's the impact to the overall region budget, and what are the main drivers? And you don't necessarily need a full P&L. It's just what are the main drivers and the kind of incremental or decremental cost analysis. And then the split between the two towns is the other piece. And the closer the per pupil expenditure rate gets and converges, the less impact there is, at least in the year one of conversion.
So I don't think it was done in the analysis. Like, I mean, literally taking last year's full budgets, 3 regional budgets. Can somebody run those out as if there was one? Can somebody mock that up and say, if you had operated this way, and then do it for this year and do it for the next 3 years projected? Because then we have a really firm, solid grasp on a couple variables in there, right? Because if you did it last year, let's make the assumption you're not offering the insurance in Berlin yet, but we sort of start staggering towards that just to look at what last year would have looked like if the teachers' contracts were the same.
Mars will do exactly that.
Okay, that's probably the major piece we're missing.
My only question about that is whether that's something internally you feel that you would be able to do or would have the time to do.
I mean, if it's current state, it's easy to do. If it's what are the and even factoring in some additional healthcare, there's pieces I can do. The decision on what the pay scales are going to look like. I would need to know what that is, and we can calculate it.
They usually project what's the highest one. Everybody goes in that one.
Yeah,
And it's phased, though. You can phase it over 2 or 3 years.
But you usually show worst case scenario first.
And that's what
doing it all at
CMRPC did.
once.
CMRPC did.
And then you have to show,
They have that in there.
if you phase it, this is what it would look like.
But we're a little bit
England's
unusual.
had it
We're one of our
phased over several
we have a high
years,
scale in Berlin, and they do not have retiree health insurance now. If they're going to get retiree health insurance, they're getting a huge value, and
That's where.
I mean, I'll tell you right now, I've virtually never seen regionalization effort that saves money in total. Because that's something we talked to the state about, because the transportation savings isn't enough to cover the changes you're going to have to make on insurance and wages. So it's the reason regionalization efforts don't happen usually. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it.
I think that's, that's pretty much what the conclusion was. If you looked at the Abrams group, the impact was very modest in terms of a positive net impact for the whole district. I think our perspective is there are a lot of reasons that we're interested in regionalization. There are a lot of costs that are associated with our current kind of crazy structure too. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, opportunity cost that we pay in terms of having multiple contracts. And,
Well, from an educational point of view, from efficiency point of view, administration, trying to get good administrators to come in and work here, all of those things would be dramatically better. The cost is almost never the driver, though. It's just not, it's something you have to overcome more than anything else.
I think we all agreed on that at one point too, and realized that if that was the cost we're bearing to get this done, probably not the right route.
I just want to make one
Let's not
comment
go that route.
about all that.
But that's hard in a small town.
With the cost and the study is Berlin is spending so much more over their minimum contribution than Boylston is. As Berlin goes towards paying less over their minimum contribution. That helps even the scales. And as Berlin gains more population and Boylston goes down, that helps even the scales. And I feel like with this year's budget, we're stepping in that direction with the very minimal increase at the elementary level to try and bring that over net school spending down. But that Abrams group took that huge disparity and projected that out as well. So as those variables come more into balance, that helps it become a more equitable.
The other piece that I questioned too was around the Chapter 70, because Berlin has a higher level of Chapter 70 than Boylston.
Yep.
And I'm not sure the Abrams group took that in. I think they just sort
I
of.
think what they did was they took the regional contribution and they just used that. I believe that's what they did. Bob, you can confirm that when you look at it a little closer. Because what the region is the combine between the two. So Berlin's is way up here, Boylston's is way down here, and the region's in the middle. And I believe they took the regional one, and that's what they used for their calculation.
And I think he ran that by Desi too. That
Yeah,
was the
he
right
did.
approach.
Just as Christine Lynch was going out.
Yeah.
I forgot who was coming in, but just as Christine was leaving, that's right.
The other elephant in the room is we are on the edge of a precipice in terms of what's going to happen with health insurance and what's going to happen to our state budget. If something like the new health bill passes, the state stands to lose $1 billion in year one. And that has to impact on, just the decimation of Medicaid would impact on the schools. Medicaid's funding some of the special education. So those are impacts that could be absolutely devastating and completely change the financial picture. I think obviously we're all hopeful that Massachusetts is somehow going to be protected, but if it's losing billions of dollars from the feds to support Medicaid, it's got to be made up somewhere, and it's going to impact.
Right.
us.
And actually, I just went to the Down the Hill. Cliff and I went with a student and one of the representatives that was talking about the Chapter 70. She stated that we are so below, the foundation budget is so low compared to where we need to be, that if they were to take their increase, their projected increase that they do every year, it would take 100 years for them to get to what we need today for our actual foundational budget. That's how far behind they are to supporting their education. It's scary.
Which is another whole factor.
So they're already behind as it is. I think that, you really have to be looking at what the townspeople are ready to do. And I think one thing that's great in these efforts is you have Berlin and Boylston are both towns that are very highly invested in their school systems. They are, in a very positive way. So this is going to, not that this is an easy road, Angela, you and I have seen that a couple of times already, even before, but it's definitely a bumpy road that you're going to be going across, but I think the effort is commendable.
So next steps, Bob, you'll take a look at the Abrams report. I think we all should go back to, and I have not done it recently, reread both of the reports that exist. Maybe pull out some key things. We have a meeting, our first meeting is May 22nd. I'm wondering if we want to, I hate to ask this, but if we should think about reconvening before the 22nd.
And I think
So
we're going to
that-
need our talking points.
Yeah, yeah.
Russ, where you have, I'm sorry, Lori, I just wanted to ask where you have gone through this process before. I don't know if there's any recommendations you have of talking points for the committee before they go forward to the selectmen. I know that Berlin has already requested all of the our budgets for the last, what was it, the last 3 years?
Five.
For the last 5 years. The Berlin Selectmen's already asked for those budgets. They've already asked for the, all of the feasibility studies and everything that we've already done, if they can get copies of all of that. So, Cheryl and I are just going over all the documents this morning, just to make sure that they have the right information, and all the information that they've requested. So,
We should-
Berlin's asked for that. Boylston has not, but even though they have not asked for it, I'm going to send it to them anyway.
I was gonna say, make an assumption, it's just, if there's a request from one side,
We're going to do.
send it to the other two.
I think it's in their town reports, but anyway, we can still get it.
They are, but that's okay.
And is it, do we have, and this is my failure here, is there a designated share drive now for this process? And if not, because we can
I'll
put
develop one.
we can put the studies in there and any
There's
of
a
the documents
Google
There's a
Docs folder
for,
for regionalization.
okay, just so all those studies will be in there.
And I
right?
believe the studies are in there, but maybe we can verify that.
And I think we should also, not to overwhelm the drive, but anything we're sending to the towns, we
Put
should
in the
just
drive.
keep in that drive. So from everybody's perspective, we can reference it, go back to it, instead of doing triplicate work.
Put it in the shared drive instead of Google Docs, so that in case we could put Excel files, Word files.
Yes.
PDFs.
Okay.
I think it's a shared,
Okay.
isn't it a shared drive already?
Yep. You're right.
One thing I do, I don't want to lose track either of the Mars piece. I want to come back to that. But one of the things that I think is going to be really important in these meetings we have is that we not try to discuss financial implications in detail at this stage. I think we can acknowledge that certainly we understand that's a primary concern for the communities. That we feel that the information that's out there is not 100% complete yet, that a part of the work of this group is to get to a place where we feel greater clarity around the financial implications. And so we don't want to get into, well, this study said this, or, in terms of that kind of specificity. I think we need to acknowledge that, there's still more work to be done. And that's why this is an exploratory process.
And I think our meetings with the teachers specifically are really about listening. We talked about using that term very specifically, a listening session. I think it's about, we're in the exploratory phase of considering regionalization. This session is really not about sharing facts of our findings, but more of, we want to document and listen to your concerns so we can take it back to the committee and make sure those are addressed. That's it, I think. You agree?
Oh, yeah.
That's a great point, Matt. I even think that's the approach with the select boards and the finance committees, is that we want to gather information from them. They may say, well, what about retiree health insurance? And we say,
Well,
okay,
write it
that
down.
we got to put that on the list, that's an important consideration.
And that's actually, to go back to Nadine's question, one of the most successful things I've seen is that you have a list of all the concerns that people have given you throughout all these meetings, and then you have all of the answers to everything they've brought
A
up.
sheet that's publicly available.
And you keep adding every time you go to a meeting, and something new comes up, teacher brings up something, what's going to happen on my job security or whatever, list the answer. And so, again, I think Mount Greylock actually did a great job of doing that. And I think that's something where a townsperson can just go look and say,
It's an FAQ, like
here it is,
Yeah.
there's the
everybody
answer.
does on a website, right?
You just have to be careful, and they were careful about this, that it can't be that every answer says, go regionalize. It needs to be a neutral, balanced
See answer
response.
one.
It needs to say,
Ending C.
well, these are the positive answers, these are the negative answers to that question. It's, but I think if you do it that way, it's,
Transparent?
it helps a lot of people. Somebody that just shows up to town meeting and isn't going to read everything else, but they might read that. So,
Well, that's the nature. We're all going to be at the position, we're going to look for that concern we might have, and that's where we start.
yeah.
And I've seen it and heard it too, and I think that we should, and this is me trying to take a little control of the meeting, I apologize, but I don't think we've given an opportunity here for everyone to share feedback if you've heard any yet too. We should probably make that as part of our agenda when we normally get together, is what are we seeing and hearing currently? Is there a dialogue? Is there a low rumble going on? because people are aware of the way these towns work. It gets out quick, right? We know that once we sit down and have a regional meeting, it gets talked about. And I'm sitting on the benches at softball games, and it is.
I could tell you what my question was. Someone else put that in my ear.
Yeah. So
You know, it's just
I've
amazing.
I've had a former
I think it
teacher.
was 24 hours. That election happened.
I had a former teacher reach
I know
out
the
to me and
troublemakers are
say they
and
have documentation on previous regionalization attempts, and my mistake in that was, well, I'd love to learn what that is, and
I was actually going to say it.
I was like, hey, it'd be great to get your support. She goes, I'm not going to promise you my support. I have the information. I'm like, okay, careful on my words. I didn't mean it that way, but she was quick to. So but I'm hearing both sides. And I sat at softball yesterday, and there was, the questions were about the kids in both towns playing on these teams, and one teacher in one region, and then I said, well, that's part of our issue, is the fact that we have kids that are getting sort of, we have to be careful of teachers in each market, in each region. We can't move one just without sight or sound. We're operating as 3 different districts, and it's done 3 times, and they're like, that's ridiculous. I'm like, okay, good. Yes, so I think that we need to sort of have a forum to be able to get this back to our group.
I will say, for myself, I'm always walking on eggshells on this topic because, I try not to show my opinion one way or the other on this topic. But at coffee chats, it's definitely a topic of conversation. Bob's been to a couple this year, and it is a question. But I think that the parents really want more information. And I think once you have, on June 8th, when you have the committee and you can talk, I think when you say, you're going to set up for these public forums, I think you have so many different people that will be a part of the committee. Some are familiar with the committee process, some are not. That I think it's going to be important that you express to the committee that, that right now you're information seeking, right? You're researching this, and this is what you're doing right now is a research effort, but that you're not necessarily, they can't go out there and speak as if they are the representative of the committee, and that's tricky.
Can we ask Cheryl to build a sheet or a documentation process so we could email her if we get a question in the community, and funnel some things through to her so she can start building a list for us? Because if you get that question on the bench from somebody, or we can feed that in through Cheryl so it's documented. Because if we start seeing a pattern of the same concerning question, that gets to the top of the list where we need to get answers. Not to say we publicly post that yet, but the goal will be is
Yeah,
if
I wouldn't post it yet.
I still
at some point.
I still would say, even though you have a full committee, this is you guys really driving this. I think, Russ, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that if you're going to have people that if there's questions, it shouldn't go to all 19 or 20 people in the committee. Everybody on that committee should know that those questions should go to and designate.
That's not actually. I mean, you could have a subcommittee of the committee. It might not necessarily be you.
Yeah.
But what I've seen is actually that full 19, they do everything together. And can get unwieldy. That's a lot of people. But those 19 have to really have the same exact information to be together and everything, because if you don't, and then something comes up and you look divided in any way, you can forget it. I mean, it is, I think you're right, that's the typical way we run everything usually, but in this case, you really need those 19 people.
I do think it's important though, right, because the goal of the committee, right, is to your point in the last school committee, is to provide a spot where you're still researching, right? You're still in the phase of gathering information and coming and putting together a project that's the right way, right? I think, to your point, you still have to provide those people out there who are asking those questions, give them the sense that there is an avenue for them to get questions to that committee, right? And that this is something that they're a part of as well, right? So I think, I don't know how you get that done, and I think that's for you to help with.
I think once it comes into the 19, then I think you're right that it can be.
How
you're going to need somebody to
right.
figure out, how you answer it and who puts it up on the
I
board.
wish it was even a web portal where someone could just type in a question, submit it, we get it, and it gets.
Yeah. A lot of
Well, I
times.
think you can end up doing that. You can do a Google survey.
That is the way we're going to get, I think, community involvement, and that's part of a control process too, is if they feel that they're getting hurt. And the other side to that is if they submit questions and it's 6 months and they haven't heard anything, that's gonna piss somebody off. So we have to be careful of how much we take in, but I think we have to start documenting right away where the concerns are.
So for these early meetings, though, I think there's a balance between, I mean, our objective is listening and gathering information and concerns and topics, but we can't just go in and that's all we have on our agenda. Like, we have to go provide a little bit of information. You know, what have we been doing? How did we come to this place? Where to, you know, sharing the charter helps. But people want to know that we know something about this stuff, you know, that we're not just coming in completely with no background in where this is headed. So it's balancing those things, you know, it's maybe some brief introductory information and overview, and then it's providing the structure of, we're interested in hearing what you think key concerns would be. And that being as much as possible more of the meeting than that introductory stuff. But we do still have to provide some content. So could we look, I want to get back to Mars, because I know we've asked Bob if he would review some stuff. Do we want to explore what options we might have in terms of Mars being a resource for us?
Yeah, I can reach out well, actually, Steve Hemman and Barbara Ripper now. Barbara Ripper's now the new executive director, and Steve Hemman is now the assistant executive director.
So he's back involved?
He's back involved with
Okay.
it. Harry Davis is retired, so that just all happened yesterday. We did the vote and everything yesterday. So I'll get in touch with Barbara and Steve and tell them, ask them if they have some kind of a, you know, different areas.
We used to work with
Yeah,
her.
like the menu that
She
Bob
was a
was
superintendent
describing.
in a couple places.
My other question is, you know, when Dr. Hemming came and talked to the school committee a few years ago and gave us this handout, and he recommended that our committee have a facilitator. And so my question to you all then is, like, kind of Russ, I know Lori's been doing an awesome job facilitating these meetings, but is Russ kind of our facilitator, or do we want to look at Mars at being
You don't wanna look at me.
a facilitator for us? That's just something else.
Well,
I
there's a
wanna bring
reason
up.
you wouldn't want me, really, is I'm going to be more of the resource on the process, the legal issues, all of that. But you need somebody that's kind of your spokesperson. And I wouldn't say, see, Mr. Hemmon is more regionalization guy, you know, that's what he knows. He kind of, and he might come across, he's very knowledgeable, but he might come across as more, you know, pushing that agenda. I think you do need somebody to kind of be the leader of the process, but it probably should be somebody amongst all of you. Because
think
people know you, they don't
yeah.
know me. I mean, it's,
I think Lori's a natural at it.
Yep.
So I
agree.
think she'd be an excellent facilitator for the big, larger group.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pose the question. So I'm very comfortable if you are, Lori, kind of steering us and keeping us on track.
Can
Okay.
I just add one thing I think was important that Matt said? When you had that conversation, you know, on the sports field, one thing that I think all of us sometimes forget, and I definitely do, is I'll have conversations with my friends and they have no idea what I'm talking about. You know, so I say, well, the school committee does this, and, you know, the superintendent does that. And they're like, well, what does the school committee really do? Are they elected? And, you know, like they I mean, you got to look at the really basic, and it almost, I mean, the board of selectmen should know, but usually you say, you know, this is what we have right now. We have a school committee that runs everything. There's 3 of them. You know, there's 3 budgets. There's 1 superintendent. This is what they do. You really have to make it pretty basic, because the average person, I mean, before I was in this job and on a school committee and all that stuff, I didn't know this either. And so it's really, when the answer on that question and answer is efficiency, you got to be pretty specific what that means. I mean, it means you're not going to have to do 3 budgets anymore. You're not going to have to have meetings in 3 different places anymore. It's, you really got to drill down as if the person doesn't know anything about school committees and how a school runs. Because the average person, they're busy, like they have a life, they're not doing this stuff. And so it really has to be that basic to
Yeah.
get people to understand. Because your system right now is totally inefficient.
And the
You would
average-
never run a company this way.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, the average person doesn't realize that it's not already one district.
Yeah. Which is ironic.
Yeah, it's true. Most people because it's Berlin, Boylston Public Schools on the website. They don't mean that's Berlin and Boylston Public Schools. They think
There
it's
is
just Berlin, Boylston.
nobody
Yeah.
that when you tell them about the 3 different processes is not shocked and could, like, what the heck when they
Yeah.
hear that. There's I've never heard one person be like, that's awesome. You know, like.
Well, even
3
superintendents,
paychecks. Yeah, when I
we
heard
all
that for the
talk
first
to each
time,
other.
I was like,
When
holy
we all
moly.
talk to each other, like just yesterday, I was talking to Daryl McCall from Wachusett. Now he's 5 towns, but he's 1 district. Now that's a big district, right? He looked at me and he goes, "There is no way I would want your job." He says, "You have 3 different budgets. I'm dealing with 1 budget with 5 towns."
Which
And-
he didn't get past.
Right, which he didn't. Right, which we were talking about that yesterday with him. His next steps. He had 2 towns deny, Paxton and Rutland. But you know, he's like, there's no way. And then I said, well, and then 2 of my associations are MTA and 1's AFT. He goes, what? 3? No, he goes, that's insane. So you know, it's just so even among superintendents that hear about this dynamic, they're like, oh my God, like it's a nightmare because they know it's 3 separate paychecks. It's 3. You know, when we have somebody, which you guys know I'm preaching to the choir, but when you have somebody with special needs and we have to have services and we're sharing within building, I can't just very easily just move somebody from one building to the other to meet that child's individual needs. And that's where those types of costs that come up.
So I have 3 next steps, and then can we look to potentially schedule?
I have 9 next steps, so
Oh.
go for it.
Well, maybe
3
you
or
ought to
3.
go first. The 3 major ones that I wrote down were exploring Mars, Bob reviewing the Abrams report, and me drafting a letter to parents to send to you. What
Many of
else
all
do you
committee
have?
members will report out the report. We'll pull out the reports and we'll reread them.
Yeah.
They are saved on a share, I believe.
I believe so too.
Yep.
I tried to look that up really quick. And then we're going to reconvene before
Right.
the May 22nd. I had developed a designated share drive, but it's already in there.
It
It's
is.
in the doc folder, regionalization. However, I'm also going to have Cheryl place everything that is sent to one town to make sure that they go to both towns. And that everything that's being sent is added to the regionalization subcommittee folder. And then Cheryl will build a list, so if questions come up or whatever, we'll at least have that documented. I think that's everything.
Okay, great. So can we look at calendars?
Bob, want me to pull yours up, or do you have yours?
Are you gonna want me,
I get
I'm
it.
going to the June 8th meeting, are you gonna want me for this meeting, the next one? Or is this just preparing?
This is preparing.
It's really preparing, so
For
I
the
think it would
board.
be okay if he wasn't here. Does anybody disagree? Just for the preliminary meeting next week, which is what
We're not getting into any legally, legal waters with any of this.
the real focus is, once you've had a chance to review the reports, I think we want to pull a few bullet points from those and then put our agenda together for the 22nd. And that will form an agenda for our future meetings as well. All right.
Ow, what? No, I'm kidding. All right.
So, Thursday, May 18th.
I am, how about Wednesday at 8 o'clock?
I am Monday through Thursday, I'm traveling, I'm gone.
All right, and I'm out
Monday through Thursday?
Sunday through Thursday, quite frankly, but
And I'm out Friday.
Friday is academic awards at 8.
Boston,
Hardest question.
Chicago, New York.
I'm out
So,
Friday.
So at least
God.
we can meet the 22nd before
No.
the selectmen's meeting.
I don't have to travel that much anymore. I love
I haven't been, but I'm getting pressure.
Maybe that
I
wouldn't
cut
be a
down
bad
my-
idea, because in that way there, we are all fresh on our mind of what we're saying.
Before the selectmen's
So you
meeting on the 22nd? Let's really
Yeah,
No-
so
no
other option.
in
You're right.
a 2-second conversation here too is what are we looking to communicate at that meeting? What is the goal?
So what if we do this? Why don't I put together just a quick bulleted sheet with agenda, send it to all of you, and you react to it. You add stuff to it. Angela, you're terrific at this stuff.
The best.
You are the best in this
Oh,
whole
gosh,
group.
guys.
But just to give you something to react to, rather than have us try to do this at a meeting, especially if it's right before the
I
selectmen's
think
Just
that's a good
remember,
idea.
you cannot go back and forth on that. You'll be a
How do we-
violation of open
Okay,
meeting law.
so do we people send comments to Cheryl, or what, legally, what can we
Well,
do?
you could send an agenda, and then when you have your meeting, you can modify it then.
Right.
But I
So
think
we can
we're
all take
saying-
personal notes and then convene for 10
Right.
minutes and go over
So
it.
that way, if you do it the day of the meeting,
You're all fresh in
You'll
your
all be-
mind.
Yeah,
So-
but then we don't have materials
I think,
finalized.
so I'm assuming the objective of these meetings are literally to almost read through what the charter is, confirm their receipt, ask if they have questions, concerns, so we can document and address. We may not have all answers, but in a nutshell, I think that's what that being on that agenda is. Correct?
Yeah, I think there's a few key questions. I think that we need to be on the same page of how we're gonna respond. So an example is, they're gonna say, what's the financial impact of this so far? What do you know? And I think we need almost some
Okay.
Q&A where we've isolated how we're gonna respond to certain questions.
Just to give you a quick, like off the tip of my tongue, if I was asked that question, just boom. One of my answers would be, although we did 2 feasibility studies, we're still looking for other resources with Mars to be able to provide us with some of that feedback. We haven't really seen so much as the financial aspect. That's the driving force on this. It's other inefficiencies, and that's why we're gonna have a full committee. When we have Mars, we want the full committee on board to hear and to be able to ask Mars those questions as we proceed.
I
That's
think-
kind of where I would, if it was me, just off the cuff, that's how I would respond.
Can I
I
throw
think-
something else out there just to think about? I mean, their second feasibility study said that the cost to the region overall was going to be slightly less. I mean, if we paid for a feasibility study, I'd reference it. And then I would also say that the driver of Boylston absorbing more of the long term is really the difference in per pupil spending.
proportion,
And we've seen some small convergence this year. We anticipate some small convergence
Next year.
based on what we're seeing in our trends, which will help. So, I mean, it doesn't solve the issue, but I think those are some positives.
I would add one more point to that, those 2 points, and then the third point, honestly, I think Russ's point was really good to say, it's rare that regionalization is gonna save money. It's gonna be much more efficient, but we're not going into this with the expectation that our motivating driver is we're gonna save
We're not going to be the Boylston Berlin tax cut for the year. That's not what we are.
Correct. And I think it's great to set that expectation right out of the gate.
And that's not your goal. Your goal is to build efficiencies in the school
Yeah,
system.
it's not our job
It's not
to
your
worry
job.
about, not to sound awful, but our job is not to worry about continuing to cut budgets. Our job is to try to make the education we offer to the pupils of Berlin and Boylston the best possible education we can provide. That is our
Right.
job. That's it.
Usually a big driver in the savings side is because you have 3 superintendents, you have 3 business managers, you have 3 of everything. You already, you don't have that. So that savings is gone. So now you're just talking about transportation. So because of that, you can't expect this to save, maybe it's going to be a wash, maybe you spend a little more money, but it's not going to be this big savings that you might see in bigger places.
But it's not going to be a dramatic impact either, negative. It's not going to be suddenly everyone pays
shouldn't be.
2x because of
Yeah.
the change. That's
Yeah.
not the real. Yeah.
It just can't be. I think you're right that you got to come out of the gate saying, that's not really what this is about, and it isn't.
Right.
It's about running a company. It is a company efficiently. you can't run a company this way, it'd make any sense. And I'll tell you, I've had places that were looking for superintendents that are set up like you, and they can't get them.
Yeah. Well,
We know
worth
that.
mentioning.
For many, many years.
Well, how
That's
many-
one of
And
our.
business managers too.
How many districts are actually set up like that? Might not be worth mentioning. Like out of this number in the state, there's probably, was it 4,
Handful.
5? I don't know.
There's a handful.
There's a few.
One thing on the
More
financial piece
Silver League.
too is, and I don't necessarily think we need to communicate this initially, but I don't want, like, people should, I expect the budget's gonna go up. I mean, the regional budget's gonna be a lot bigger, but that's because the elementary school budget's gonna get rolled into it. There's gonna be offsets in the town budgets. They're not gonna be paying for the healthcare of the, so I think, like, it might look like there's gonna be an offset in the municipal side too, and so when people look at the educational line, at some point they're gonna see, well, why is that increasing? And there's some things gonna be in there that used to be in the town budget.
If you pay Mars for anything, I would say it's that, because they give you that information too, how, with the effect on the towns. So that's just the big picture, but you're gonna have to bid this, obviously, depending on the amount.
Okay, I need to go, and I want to be respectful of your time. So we're not going to try to convene, or we are going to try to, I have a difficulty doing anything right before the meeting. I could do lunchtime on Monday if we really feel we need to convene versus,
You can't do that Monday at 8 a.m.
I mean, if I'm back Thursday morning, I can probably get in Thursday afternoon. But that's what I'm flying back.
I have a meeting from 8:30 to 11 at Marlboro High School that morning. The
Oh,
STEM
interesting.
Village College meeting.
And then what about just curious, Thursday night, the 18th?
I could actually do later in the evening.
There's a band
My
concert.
daughter's getting her braces off that day. It's like a red letter day.
I'm at the MASS Spring Conference during the day on Thursday, but I can be here for like 5:30 on Thursday the 18th
So
p.m.
5:30,
Could we
6?
do like 6 o'clock over
I
at
can probably do
Tohoto?
that.
Because I think the band concert's at 7.
Oh,
6
okay.
at Tohoto, done.
Is that all right?
Okay,
And then
so
if you-
Thursday, May 18th at 6
I'm
p.m.
at the Cape on a conference.
Okay. But that's okay, we're not gonna be speaking anyway, they are.
Okay.
And then if you still send out to us, everyone
Yep.
still reads the 2 reports, and if you still send out a draft of talking points for us to
Yep.
look at. And,
We wanna do this at Tohoto, you said?
yes, please.
We'll go in the conference room for that, we don't need the big multi-purpose room. And you said there's a concert that night?
I think there's a band concert. I have it on my calendar.
All right. Thank you so much.
Oh, you know what?
Jim, I'm
You know what?
delighted that
You know what? You know what?
Actually, let me- It's
not right.
Sorry, I can't do that. I can't do what we just said. I can't.
You can't do Thursday.
I can't do Thursday night. I could do, actually, I could do 5:30. 6 is okay. Yeah, if it would be a short meeting.
That
Take
band
that.
concert's at 6 o'clock.
It is?
Band and choral concert 6 to 9.
Let's do 5:30. You said you could do 5:30 on the 18th? Can you do
Shoot it out.
5:30?
Shoot it out, and if it's a conflict, I can't. I have to check. I'll have to check.
Okay.
So are we doing 5:30 on the?
Shoot for
18th?
5:30 on the 18th.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Do you need a motion?
You won't have to worry about answering questions at softball that night.
Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.